And I'm going to yield to the gentleman from, who should I pick on? Oh, we'll let the Hoosier State champion over here, Rudy Yakym, with 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Young, is the southern border secure?
We absolutely need more resources and authorities.
And let me just show you a chart of southern border crossings to the first 37 months of the last 6 presidential terms. Can you tell me which one of these lines represents the Biden administration?
You picked me on a bad eye day, but even if it wasn't, I tend not to guess in these situations, so I'm sure you'll tell me.
Well, it would clearly be the top line, showing the highest number of border crossings in the first 37 or 38 months of this administration for the last 6 presidential terms. You know, you talk about needing more resources. The House Republicans, the very second bill that we passed was H.R. 2, and the Senate has done absolutely nothing about that. This southern border crisis is a crisis of President Biden's own making. He created this crisis with a stroke of the pen. He can fix it with a stroke of the pen. And Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit into the record, a list of 64 executive actions that have been taken by the Biden administration to create this border crisis, all of which they refuse to take to overturn their own executive actions, which would fix the southern border. Instead of acknowledging the crisis at the border, the playbook has been to cast blame on others and downplay it. It's the same playbook that we've seen with inflation when we were told it would only be temporary or transitory. But Americans still feel the pain inflicted by Bidenomics wherever they turn. Director Young, I've got another chart to show you. Similar to the last chart, this one is the cumulative inflation for all items through the first 38 months of the last 6 presidential terms. Can you tell me which one of those lines would you believe would be the Biden administration's inflation?
Again, Mr. Yakym, I'm sure you'll tell me.
Do you have a guess?
I don't guess.
You don't guess?
Not usually.
Well, it would be no surprise to anyone in the audience or anyone listening at home that the top line showing the highest inflation for the last 6 first presidential terms is indeed the Biden administration. I think it's fair to contrast that with House Republican budget framework, which proposes no new taxes and actually balances the budget over the course of the next 10 years. Director Young, what will adding an additional $18.2 trillion to the national debt, a 50% increase over where we are today in terms of national debt, what do you believe that will do to inflation, which again is your budget proposal, the president's budget proposal?
Mr. Yakym, I would ask you to please look at our budget proposals. That's why we are asking the top 1% to not only pay for things like childcare and paid leave, but also reduce our deficit by $3.2 trillion and stabilize debt.
How do you get to the $3.2 trillion reduction? Where does that number
I think you're
come
asking me to comment on baseline. We're here to talk about the president's budget and his policies and how they put us on a better fiscal path.
So the CBO said prior to the Fiscal Responsibility Act last year that we were going to add an additional $20.3 trillion to the debt by 2033. They revised that after the Republican-led FRA down to $18.9 trillion, but yet your budget still calls for an additional $18.2 trillion of debt, and that is with $5 trillion of tax increases. So I'm a little bit confused on how the Biden administration is saying that they saved $3 trillion when on the current baseline, as you say, it is $18.9 trillion, but again, you're proposing $18.2 trillion of additional debt on top of $5 trillion of tax increases.
As someone who helped negotiate the FRA, which I've heard a lot of indications we were dragged to the table and didn't see their child for a very long time doing that, this president supported where we ended up. We never believed the debt ceiling should be used as a political tool, which would have jeopardized 8 million jobs. But we did this deal, we signed this deal, and this president worked in a bipartisan way, and Democrats voted for it in a bipartisan way to save $1 trillion over the next decade.
Director Young, yesterday the president said, and I quote, "Wages are up more than prices. Inflation is down dramatically." Is that true?
That is true. Inflation has moderated 2/3.
So I have another chart to show you, and this is the first 37 months of the president's term. One of those is inflation, and the other one is real wage growth. Which one do you think would be inflation?
You ever thought about labeling these lines?
Well, it's-
Again, I'm sure you'll tell us.
Well, again, it is the highest, as the top line on there is inflation. Inflation continues to grow at a pace that is faster than real wage growth. So these numbers are pulled from your own federal agencies, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Who's right and who's wrong here? The President of the United States or his agency, the Bureau of Labor and
Mr.
Statistics?
Yakym, if you're worried about lowering costs for the American people, which we are, we give you a lot of proposals here that help families with childcare costs, that help families with healthcare costs, that help families with energy
The
costs.
president's own words are in conflict with his own agency. So all I want to know is who's right here? The President of the United States or the federal agency that reports to
I'll
him?
let the
I get we
gentlelady
don't wanna
answer
give
the
the president
question.
credit, but inflation has come down 2/3. There's more work to do, and that's why we have the proposals in the budget.
I thank the
you.
gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman